Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodoh. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. I'm Tony Bodoh.
And I'm Betsy Westhafer. Thanks for being here today.
Today we're talking with Ryan Schreiber, and we're going to talk about cool concepts he's given us in prep. And one of them is this idea of disqualifying your customer. And I think it's so important because if you really put your customer at the center of the universe, you've got to know who that customer is.
Absolutely. I'm looking so forward to this conversation. In our prep with Ryan, we had so many good topics to go deep into, and I'm really looking forward to exploring just the whole concept about how important customer relationships are for the business, the actual business case, that it's not just a warm, fuzzy, soft skills kind of thing that's a nice to have. It's really, really important to the future of the business. So without further ado, Ryan, welcome. Glad to have you here today.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me, y'all.
Yeah. So Ryan, you are the Director of Engagement, if I have that correct, at CarrierDirect.
Yep.
And so I think it's such a great thing that they have a title that includes engagement. So really looking forward to hearing more about that. But why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your career path, how you got to where you are now, and the focus of the work that you're doing right now?
That's a pretty broad question. I work in trucking and logistics, and I started that career a little over 10 years ago. And when I got out of college and I went straight into law school, and then I graduated law school in the middle of the last recession. And this is the first time I've been through a recession employed, which I'm pretty excited about so far. I haven't been through the recession yet, but hopefully I get through the whole thing employed. And I'd be very lucky if that was the case. And I got out of law school and I had no desire to get into sales. I had no interest in sales. I didn't think that I would be any good at sales, but I'm a hustler and I couldn't get job interviews. And I just ended up pounding the pavement and walking around to law firms with my resume in my hand in a suit here in the city of Chicago and asking anybody to talk to me. And nobody would. And eventually I got to the point where I just had to figure it out, and I got into sales and I got into logistics sales. And over the last 10 years, I've built a couple of different businesses in the space and exited those in different ways. I joined CarrierDirect a little over a year ago, and I focus on engagement. And that's everything from business development to to customer engagement and making sure our customers are kind of having a great experience in working with us, and marketing piece as well. So I should probably say a little bit about CarrierDirect, a management consulting and technology delivery firm that works just in trucking and logistics. So
tell us a little bit more about that with the types of engagements you have at CarrierDirect.
Yeah, we essentially have 4 lines of business. We have the traditional management consulting, which is process improvement or better vendor selections, things like that. Technology strategy. What's your 3 to 5 year technology strategy? What are some frameworks for making buy versus build decisions? And then organization changes that go along with that. Like when you select a new piece of software, your business needs to change to make sure that it's adopted. It's training, but it's also maybe compensation. It's also process in and out. And technology delivery is the third one. And we build proprietary software for our clients. And then recently we've been rolling out our fourth line of business, that we've been rolling out some offerings like training as a service. Training is something I'm very passionate about. We have an offering of CarrierDirect Learning, which is a type of training as a service. Take people on a learning journey, just really, really passionate about learning. And like I said, we work exclusively in transportation and logistics. So shippers are one segment of our customer, transportation providers, brokerages, carriers, 3PLs, and then technology companies that serve the same space as us. So Project 44 or truckstop.com, not sure if any of your listeners know those companies, but those would be some examples.
So Ryan, it's interesting because you discovered new needs, you innovated and created a new service, and you're continuing to do that. So
it's actually entirely true. Yeah.
So Ryan, it sounds like CarrierDirect had this path where they have started with one thing and evolved into other product lines or other services. Tell us a little bit more about what that looks like inside the company and how that evolved.
Yeah, that's a great question, Tony. And I talked about the development of our service offerings, and that's really honestly just the newest iteration of that. Well, before I got here, CarrierDirect started as outsourced sales organization for small and regional LTL trucking companies. And over the course of a couple of years, these companies said, hey, you've helped us with this. but can you help us make our business better? And so we said, okay, sure. And that became management consultants and hired some management consultants. And then after a couple of years of doing that, company said, hey, you've helped us with this process problem. Like, we have a technology problem. Can you help us with that? And we said, sure. We know the space. We're subject matter experts. We'll bring on some technologists. Most recently with our offer, with some of these like off the shelf offerings, like training as a service, our clients are struggling with training and they don't know how to train their people effectively, or they don't have the resources to do it because it's either too expensive or too time consuming. And so now we're this mix of industry experts like me who come from a long background in the industry, technologists, and so engineers and product managers, and then traditional management consultants who can deliver for our clients, because it really just started with like listening to our clients and hearing what they had to say and hearing what they needed and feeling their pain, and not just pushing a solution on them that they maybe didn't quite fit anymore after their problems were solved.
I like that because it shows the evolution of solving a problem and then moving into a new space. Like, how do we evolve with our client? That's one of the things that I've often talked about is your clients may outgrow your need, what you provide, because you fulfill those needs. And so they need something else from you. So how do you keep evolving that? So to me, it sounds like that's like this idea of the customer centric, or the customer is the center of the universe. Talk about that and your perspective there.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, I mean, what you just highlighted is a perfect example of the old adage that the most dangerous phrase in business is like, we've always done it that way. Right. And I talk for years and I talk all the time to our customers now about like, you basically have two choices. Like, there's the Amazon paradigm, which is always treat every day as the first day, right? Day one at Amazon. Or you can be Sears and Roebuck and you can just decide to keep doing whatever you're doing. And it's going to be a long, painful death. And so, putting your customer at the center of the journey is really about listening to your customer, or really prospective customer, listening to your prospective customer openly and hearing what they have to say, and not just necessarily powering through to get to whatever end you had in mind. I mean, every conversation, every interaction with a customer needs to have a close, right? And you need to know where you're going, but it's as important to close on what you had previously planned as it is to close and say, doesn't fit. Like, I'm going to go back and I'm going to think about how if I'm hearing this enough from a number of customers, maybe my business needs to change and evolve to be able to better serve my customers.
That's awesome, Ryan. I love the concept of, really understanding how the customers impacts your own business. You're not just listening to the customers for them, which is important, but it's also important for your own business to listen to the customers. So when we were talking earlier, you mentioned something about the focus you put on disqualifying customers. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Are you listening to learn, or are you listening to reply? Right. And that's really the biggest sort of difference. If you're listening to reply, you're going to be looking for the wrong things. And you're not going to be, you talked earlier about building a relationship. You're not really building a relationship, right? Everybody at sometimes listens to reply and listens to learn. And it's like not necessarily a criticism of the person, but it definitely speaks to how you are interacting with that other individual. And if you're listening to learn, you're going to be able to deliver better solutions. You're going to be able to close better, and you're going to actually save yourself more time. One of the biggest reasons to disqualify a customer is respect for yourself and your own time to continue on with qualified buyers. And it's also to respect their time. And there is an element of this that people trust other people who raise their hand and say, I can't do that. I don't know that, but I'm willing to help you find someone who does.
Yeah. And it's not even just the matter of time, but if it's not a fit and you try to force that square peg into a round hole, then it can create a lot of problems where there previously hadn't been any.
Absolutely.
And then nobody wins at that point because the engagement doesn't go well. Nobody's happy. The reputation of the people on the line, it's really important. So I think that's a really key component when you're thinking about customer engagement. And it requires discipline, right? Like if a customer or prospect comes up to you and wants to spend money with you, it takes a lot of discipline. So what are some of the criteria that you personally look at when you determine whether or not something's a fit?
You brought up a really good point there that I'll hit really quickly, which is, and then it goes back to the listening to learn thing, and it ties into what we were talking about a little bit earlier about how do you figure out how to best serve your customers, right? There's a fine line here too, and I want to be clear about you don't want to look to disqualify as much as you don't want to look just to qualify. You want to go in and ask questions and learn, and then make the decision to qualify or disqualify. And what that allows you to do is figure out exactly what your customers need. Your question right now was what questions I might ask?
No, just like when you're evaluating whether or not there's a fit, what are some of the things that you look at specifically to say, like they're great people, love them, it's just not our industry, or we just don't have the bandwidth, or what are some of those things?
For us specifically, like I don't look to say yes to everything. And so, for us specifically, if they are, I said we work with shippers, we work with transportation providers, we work with technology companies that serve our space. There are lots of companies out there building technology that don't serve transportation. And right now, that's not an area that we service or that we work with. So like even in our offerings of like CarrierDirect learning, all of our learning around CarrierDirect focuses on trucking and transportation and domestically. So if somebody says, I do a lot of international air freight from Africa to India and my processes are bad, I mean, I can look at your processes, but I don't understand your area as intuitively as we do others. I mean, certainly there's the normal ones like budget. If you're not going to be a qualified buyer, I'm happy to help you any way that I can, because I do very much believe in giving value before you ask for value. And I also believe that like you never know where anyone's journey might take them, the prospects or mine. But some of those other things, like, are you going to be a good partner? And I'm asking questions like, how do you interact with vendors now? What do you value in outside help? Do you believe that you can solve these problems yourself? If the answer to that question is yes, then I'm trying to convince you to do something that you don't otherwise want to do. I use the analogy sometimes of hypnotism, right? Like you're hypnotized. They say you don't do anything you wouldn't do when you weren't hypnotized. And sales is essentially hypnotizing somebody, right? And not convincing them to do something they wouldn't otherwise do, but leading them to do it and do it with you. And so if somebody says, you know what, I know everything about the business. I know everything about, and so just go do this thing that I'm telling you to do, you're going to be a bad partner. And that's going to lead to a bad relationship.
What I think is really interesting about that, Ryan, is that this idea that you're there for the relationship first, you're there to learn about them, you're there to hear what they have to say, all in the context of what you do for a business and how you can serve them. But to me, it sounds like you want them to move ahead, whether that's with you, whether that's by themselves, or whether that's with someone else who's better qualified. Yeah,
absolutely. I said I've been at CarrierDirect for about 1.5 years now. And when I first was talking to the company and I was talking to Peter, our CEO, he asked me like, what motivates me, or what do I love, or what do I enjoy? And I said, if you look back at my career, the number one thing I like more than anything else is helping businesses get better. I've started businesses and I've grown them, but I've also I'm advisor for startups because I like helping businesses get better. When I was a service provider myself, I would tell my clients often, you know what, I can do this, but there's somebody who can do it better. Right. And that also goes to not being a low cost provider, right? Hey, if you want a low cost provider, that's somebody else and they can do it cheap. I can do it right. So if you want it done right, let's do it together. If you want it done cheap, somebody else is probably the best person for that.
So Ryan, talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing. As people know, and we've not shied away from it here on the podcast, about this challenge with the coronavirus and the way it's changing business, and just the things that matter now are different in a lot of ways than what mattered 2 months ago. So talk to us about what you're seeing in your industry and how CarrierDirect is helping their clients kind of adjust to this new abnormal, so to speak.
I like actually new abnormal. I haven't heard that before, but I've struggled with the idea that this is the new normal. I've talked a couple of times about our CarrierDirect learning, which is our training as a service. And that comes from the intersection of listening to customers and disqualifying them, by the way. What your question is here about dealing with that new abnormal. So first of all, our training as a service comes from this idea that all of our clients, regardless of size, struggle with how to effectively train their employees and take them on a learning journey that spans their first day to their last day, right? If any of them are doing training at all, they're really doing it in the first maybe 1 week to 6 weeks, and then sporadically here and there, as opposed to really being insightful about the learning journey that they want somebody to have. And that's especially true the smaller down segment you get. And CarrierDirect just really affordably could not help small and smaller mid-market companies with training, but they need it, and they need it really, really badly. And so we've developed this CarrierDirect Learning, which looks at both new hire training and also developmental training. And this isn't a pitch for CarrierDirect Learning, obviously, but also the reason we rolled it out right now and what we're prioritizing in terms of building is dealing with this new abnormal, which is everybody's remote or lots of people are remote. 30 to 90% of your workforce is remote. It's a struggle to keep people connected. And a way to keep them connected is to show that you're investing in them. And that's especially true as layoffs are hitting, right? Hey, I understand that your friends are not here anymore. And this is really hard. And our job as leaders is to keep the ship afloat. And sometimes that means you have to lose some sailors. And that's really hard to deal with. So like, how are we showing you that we really care and we're really investing in you? So keeping morale up is one of those things that's been difficult. And then legacy technology. I mean, people are looking at their technology stacks and realizing that that's one of the things that's been a struggle for them to go remote and keep their team safe. So they're struggling with those things. And we're helping with them either through technology strategy or product delivery that can really kind of help solve some of those problems so that when they come out on the other side of this, they're able to hit a slingshot.
Ryan, it's interesting listening you talk about the training and where you're moving to right now, in part because of coronavirus, but in part you were on this path already as a company.
Yeah.
And what strikes me, and Betsy and I talk about this in our book, and we've talked about this with on other podcasts, but this essentially we're moving from what used to be called, or what is called, the experience economy, where we're all focused on making memories and making people feel good, to a transformation economy where it's about guiding people through a series of experiences that help them achieve their aspirations and goals. And it's such a fundamental shift. And I think you guys are right there at the crossroads of it right now.
Thank you. It's interesting because I think that there's been a lot of scuttlebutt around like, oh, millennials and how millennials want this and millennials want that. And the reality is millennials just want something that's different. And millennials want and have wanted, to your point, a transformation. They don't want a job. Let's kind of like level set on this. No one's ever wanted a job. Other generations may have been more willing to settle for a job. Everyone wanted a passion. Everyone has always wanted to be a part of something and be on a mission. And millennials are just maybe more willing to take the risks than other generations to say like, well, if I'm not a part of something, I'm not willing to do it. And so I think that it's just accelerated this I love the way you put a box around that, Tony. And I think it maybe just accelerated or made it more obvious that folks want to be a part of a mission. They want to be on a journey. And if you're going to give that to them, they're going to feel good about that. And there have actually been really a lot of opportunities. One of the other things we've done recently is launch our own podcast. I talked recently about exactly that. Hey, if there's a way for you to do layoffs or do pay cuts, because a lot of companies have done pay cuts, there's a way to do it right and there's a way to do it wrong. The way to do it wrong is tell everybody, hey, we're doing a pay cut. So like, sorry, that sounds like a threat. But there's a way to do it right that makes people feel like they're on a mission and on a journey, and you guys all as an organization are doing it. And so if you're going to do a pay cut, you go to everybody and you say, listen, we have two choices. We might have to lay some folks off. I'm not going to say who we're laying off. I'm not going to be like, we're going to lay off Tim if you guys don't take a pay cut. But we might say, hey, we have two choices here. Like, we are in this financial situation. This is really what's going on. I'm going to pull back the curtain. There's no Wizard of Oz, right? It's just me. It's just this traveling doctor from Kansas. I'm going to pull back the curtain. I'm going to tell you guys what's going on. And so here's the reality of the situation we're in. We're either going to have to lay some folks off. We're going to have to lay off 25% of our staff, or like we need to do some pay cuts. And we're going to have to do 10% pay cuts across the board. That's what it looks like. And we're coming to you and asking for help to figure out what that looks like. And most people are going to say, I'm willing to take a 10% pay cut to save everybody else's job. Because like everybody always thinks they're on the in group, right? So like my job's okay, but like I'll take a 10% pay cut to save Steve, right? And there's a way to do that that makes people feel like they're on a mission. And there's all of these opportunities. And CarrierDirect Learning is just one of the things that we put out there to say, hey, here's a way to look at that. I know that was a little long-winded, so thanks for sticking with me.
No, I think that's so important because there are a lot of unfortunate messages that are having to be delivered right now. And having the intention of delivering the message in the best way possible to get the best outcome possible. And I love that example because you're right. Everybody thinks, oh, yeah, I'm going to be fine.
Oh, fine. Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask you about that. And then you brought it up and thinking that people assume they're saving someone else's job when in reality, they may be saving their own.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I love that you're focused on teaching others that method. It's not just, okay, this is what we do at CarrierDirect. We're really focused on it. I love that you're really out to spread that message of this is how the world can get through this better. And here's some things that you should know. So I think that's awesome. That leads me into another question, Ryan. As far as how you're engaging with your own customers, I know you're doing a lot to teach your clients how to engage with their customers and how to run their business. But at CarrierDirect, how are you engaging with your clients, particularly at the executive level? Because I assume that a lot of the people that you talk to day in and day out are at the executive level. So what is your method for how you engage yourself with your executive level clients?
Yeah, it goes back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, which is like offer value before you ask for value. A lot of times when I first engage somebody, which was true before and is also true now, is, hey, I just want to learn, right? I talked about coming in with a learner mindset. I want to learn about your business. There's value for me to learn about your business just because I like to learn about businesses. And I want to know how you're doing things differently than other people, even if there's no opportunity for us to work together. And I want to find out what it is you might be thinking about or struggling with, and how can I share resources around that thing? So I often will get off calls, or I will often leave an office where I've met somebody for the first time, and I'll send them an email with 15 links. Here's a link to a video about this technology strategy that we talked about. Here's a link to this article about thinking about compensation restructures. Here's a podcast about digital transformations in trucking and logistics. Separately, I'm going to send you an email and connect you to this other person in the industry who, based on your interests and their interests, I think you guys could be good friends. And certainly, like, that goes to when you're open and honest with yourself and also with the people that you engage with about what you want and like what you want out of this conversation. And then you follow that up with your actions. Hey, I go into every conversation and say, here are my goals of this conversation. My goal is to do this here. What are your goals? Let's just get that out on the table so we can make sure we both get what we need. I'm not going to sell you on something. I'm here to learn, and I'm here to see how I can make things happen. And then eventually, yes, and if there is a fit, if there are things that we can work on together, I want to talk about those things too. And I'm going to be honest about that. But I'm going to give that value before I ask for value in return.
I love that approach. And sometimes I hear from people, we talk about that too, about giving value first. And that's just the way it should be. I mean, there's nothing to argue with there. But I've had people say to me, I don't know what I have of value. I mean, what do I have of value? And I think people are thinking about their product or service. But what you said about, I can make this connection, I can send some resources, I can be an ear and listen. There's so many things that are valuable beyond your product and service that you can provide to customers and prospective customers.
Absolutely. Like your point about an ear or just like some perspective. This will be a little bit of an on-the-nose example, but in my industry, I got into intermodal before many intermediaries did. I liked intermodal as an offering, and I became a little bit of an expert for my clients. And then when their other vendors started getting in intermodal, they would call me and say, hey, so-and-so is telling me such and such. Can I just verify this with you? Like, does that sound right? I made no money from that, right? Like somebody else was making the money, but I still wanted to do that for my customers. And even prospects, even people I had talked to about doing intermodal or that I had put out content related to intermodal, they would come to me and they'd say, hey, I just want to kind of validate this. This is what I'm understanding. And because they also trusted me to not make something up, right? To raise my hand and say, I actually don't know the answer to that question. Your value is always your network. And you don't have to be giving them value to your product and service. It can also be connecting them to other people. It can be connecting them to things that you read. It starts with, I'm going to go back to something that I've said about 5 or 6 times, which I had not planned on talking a bunch about in this podcast. It goes back to being a learner. It goes back to having a learner mindset. If you're trying to learn and you go into conversations looking to learn, you're going to learn about that person. And if you go into every conversation looking to learn, you're going to learn how those things fit together.
What I love about the way you go into conversations and you're talking with these executives is this perspective of, I'm going to put my goals on the table. You put your goals on the table. Let's be real clear. And why I like that so much is because if you understand what's called prospect theory, we dive into this a little bit in our book. Prospect theory basically says everyone has expectations in every moment or every transaction, right? And if I want to have a 5-star experience, or if I want to give someone a 5-star experience, I need to know what their expectations are.
Yep.
And then I've got to provide them something that's perceived as a gain, which could be time, money, resources, whatever else. And I have to give them high utility. And once I give them both high utility and or usefulness, right, and gains of some way, all of a sudden it's like, wow, that was amazing. I love Ryan. I love what he does for us. I trust him. And that's value creation at its core. But so few people talk about it today. They're talking about the features and the benefits and this and that. No, let's cut to the chase. It's high utility and it's gains versus the expectation they had.
The other part of not being explicit about it in my experience is Peter, our CEO, will say, in the absence of information, people will tell themselves a story. So when I'm upfront about why I'm here and what I want from you, right, I'm removing that ambiguity and it's on the table. Like, you're listening to me and we're having a much more direct conversation than we are if you're playing a game in your mind of trying to figure out where I'm trying to take this conversation.
Yeah, and that removes friction from somebody having to process more than you want them to have to process, right? You just take that out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Always remove friction.
Yeah, I love that. Ryan, it came to me when you were talking about your network and how that's your value, that's how we got here today, because I had a conversation with our mutual friend, Joe Lynch, and he said, here's somebody you need to meet. You need to meet Ryan Schreiber. And so you and I have had multiple conversations since then, and that's been very valuable to me. Joe's not making any money on that.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But lots of goodwill. And so I know and like and trust Joe because he's done that actually multiple times. He's an amazing connector.
Yeah. He's unbelievable at that.
You know why? One of the things that really strikes me about Joe and people like Joe is when he says, oh, I should introduce you to somebody. And then he actually does. Because there are a lot of people that will say that, and then it either slips their mind, probably not intentionally, but they just never get around to making that introduction. So, that's so valuable and really creates that know, like, and trust factor. So what do you have to add to that?
The last point around, like, I intimated it, or I alluded to this in my last monologue, but about following through on your commitments. Do what you're going to say you're going to do. One of the other things I think that's a huge miss in the sales process is every time a prospect or a customer interacts with your brand, your personal brand and your company's brand, they are building a story. If you say, I'm going to connect you to so-and-so and you don't, well, what's going to happen when I need you to do X, you say you'll do X in an actual, like, a business relationship? One of my good friends in my industry, his name's Nick Dangles, brought him up in the industry, hired him 10 years ago or so. We started a couple companies together. He's been a great friend. And when he's doing sales calls, and he'll hit a brick wall, right? I mean, he's just calling and calling and calling. And he says to younger salespeople, what I want to show them is, if I'm willing to work this hard to get your business, imagine how hard I will work when I have your business, right? And so even if he's just calling to say, hey, Tina, are you still working with C.H. Robinson? Okay, great. Well, like, I told you I was going to follow up in 3 weeks. I am. I'd still love to have this conversation. Like, let's try and schedule something for 3 weeks from now. And every 3 weeks, on the nose, it's the same call. And it's following up on your commitments and showing how hard you're going to work.
And I think that also speaks to the value and importance of having systems and processes in place, because nobody could possibly remember every time you say, oh, I should introduce you to somebody, or, oh, hey.
Especially him.
Yeah.
I have a great memory. He has a terrible memory. The whole point is I remember everything. It's just like and one of the things that made us great friends is he remembers nothing. So we have this great synergy together where we're like this, yin and yang, and we've been great business partners for that reason. But exactly that point, like, it's not about being perfect. It's about knowing yourself. So again, being a learner, knowing yourself and understanding how to get where you need to go, right? And so Nick sets reminders for himself. Nick does those things to make sure that he meets his commitments, right? And it's 100% exactly right.
Okay, so we're taking a turn off of where I never expected us to go on this show, and I love it, because you're talking about knowing your customer, being a good listener. Now you're talking about knowing yourself, and to know your customer, if I'm hearing you right, you need to first know yourself.
Well, sure, right? Like, I mean, it's who listening to this has never heard, before you can love somebody else, you have to learn to love yourself. It's all one skill. It's all a skill of learning and being open and being about improvement. I want my customers to improve. For my customers to improve, I have to improve. My customers are experiencing things that I don't know anything about. Despite having been in this industry for over 10 years, despite having started and operated businesses that look exactly like theirs, despite building software, not myself as an engineer, but building software companies that built software, my customers are actually coming up on things that are at the edge of what I know. And so, yes, I'm able to make inferences and I'm able to think critically about the problems that they're facing and piece some things together. But at the end of the day, I also have to be able and willing to know myself enough to know when I don't know, to raise my hand. I mean, I talked earlier about being willing and able to say, I don't know. I think younger salespeople and younger professionals in general tend to think that their value is in having the answers, and it's not. Their value is in being point guard and saying, I'll pull somebody in who knows, right? And iterating. And that's also how you can develop your business to meet your customers' needs, by knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're not. And then saying, I've either got to learn that thing or I got to go find somebody who knows that thing, right? CarrierDirect didn't just make up. When I was talking about our journey, we didn't just make up being management consultants. We went and hired management consultants, right? We went and hired people who knew that skill. And now we're a company that has these three types of humans that can interact together and really transform the businesses of our customers.
And I think that really speaks to the quickest way to develop trust is by not pretending you know all the answers. And then, of course, trust takes you so far.
Yeah, it's the only place to go is trust.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Ryan, this has been fantastic. I loved so much of this, and I can't wait to listen to the recording. And in fact, I had this little vision in my head that I'm going to have right in front of my desk some of these bullet points that you talked about that I want to keep front and center in my own mind.
Oh, thank you.
Particularly about going into every conversation as a learner. I really, really like that. One of the final questions we have for you, we like to, on this show, give our guests an opportunity to give a shout out to a nonprofit or a charity or something like that you may just want to give props to. So is there anybody that you'd like for our audience to become aware of?
Oh, man, that's a really great question. I wish you would have prepped me for that.
I know. I'm sorry.
The first one that comes to mind for me is a nonprofit here in Chicago called Pause, which is a no-kill shelter. I'm a lover of cats. My wife and I have adopted a couple of cats, and from there, so the no-kill movement is something that I'm certainly passionate about. No-kill shelters generally. I was trying to think of something in trucking and logistics because there certainly are many, but you didn't prep me for this. So I'm just going to go with Pause. How about that? No-kill shelters, any kind of no-kill movement. That's okay. No, it's fine. I'm
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I apologize. We should have given you a heads up on that question. But yeah, we still got the word out there. So, that's an important topic. And yeah, so thanks for sharing that. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. This has just been phenomenal. There's so much good content in here. So we really, really appreciate your willingness to be on the show today.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks for having me. I had a blast. This conversation went in directions I hadn't exactly thought it would, but it was just enjoyable. So thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much.
That was awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Wow, this episode with Ryan was phenomenal. I mean, there's so many things I pulled out of it that I didn't even expect. Areas we went that I didn't think we would go on the show. And I love that. I think the things that stand out most to me, we opened with the whole idea of disqualifying and understanding really who your customer is, but then we take it through this whole idea of learning. I mean, that was unexpected.
Yeah, and it's a great reminder. It's not a new concept. I've heard it before, but the way Ryan was able to articulate that and why it's so important, he's obviously got so much passion around it. It got me really pumped up about, okay, I need to have that top of mind with every conversation I go into, which is also why I love doing this podcast with you, Tony, because every single conversation we have on this show, we learn something. And so I hope that's what our listeners are getting out of it too. I hope everybody's learning. But then again, as we always say, it's important to put that learning into action. And I know some actions I'm going to take after this particular conversation with Ryan. As I mentioned at the end of the episode, I need to keep that learning mentality front and center. I'm going to put a sign up on my wall, right above my computer, just to remember that every day, that every conversation is an opportunity to learn.
I love that. Here's what I would love to hear from this episode is if our listeners have ideas that have come to them, jump out to either Betsy's LinkedIn page or my LinkedIn page and let us know what you took away from this episode, because there was so much in here. I want to see what other people were able to pull out and the ideas that came to them. I mean, this was, again, quite an amazing show. And I think the biggest piece that I'm going to walk away with from this is really this idea of checking in with myself and understanding what is it I have to transform in myself so that my customers are better served. I love that idea.
Yeah. And Tony, I think there's never been a better time in our entire history. I know so many people that are just doing a lot of self-reflection and evaluation on, is this where I even want to be? Is this who I want to be? Those kinds of things. I think it's a golden opportunity. during this time of transition for us to all do that. So thank you everyone for being here today. We hope you got as much value as we did because boy, that was a really great interview. We thank Ryan for all of his great insights, and we will see you next time on the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodoh.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.